So I suppose the big transition for me in terms of Palmer's Green, even though I was very well travelled by the time I went to secondary school, because my father is German, so we used to travel back and forth to Germany, and we went on holiday to Italy, to France, Yugoslavia in those days, even behind the Iron Curtain in the 60s. The big challenge for me was moving to Southgate, because my parents decided that Minchinton wasn't the right school for me. I was a little bit more academic, so Southgate had a new head teacher who was very impressive. He wore a purple suit. He used to wear these very outlandish suits all the time. Peter Target was his name. A very nice man. In fact, I gave the eulogy at his funeral some years back. And when I got to Southgate, again, it was a school which was overwhelmingly white. I was by then quite confident. I was quite bullish, which meant I stood out, very sociable. And I guess by the time I was in the second and third year, well liked by the opposite sex, which kind of got me very distracted. The teachers, I think, for the main part, saw that side of my character because I was so effervescent, one might say. I was a good sportsman, and I was obviously good at performance because I was an extrovert. And so they focused their attention on me very much, I think, no disservice to them. They saw that talent in sport and in performance. So I was always in all the school plays. I was county champion, so lots of accolades in the sporting arena. And my academics, although I started very high up when I went into Southgate, they started to suffer. In fact, I can always remember a teacher in the second year, so I would have been 12, telling my parents that, your son is such a good historian. I'm convinced he could go on and do a PhD. Now, in those days, it was very unusual for teachers to even be worrying about university or PhDs, but he saw that in me. It wasn't until many years later when I finally did my PhD, which used historical methodology, not having done history as an undergraduate, that actually those words came true. So Southgate for me was not a bad time, actually. It was a good school, lots and lots of friends, and not a mixed school, a very Jewish school. That presented some issues in terms of going home with girls and their parents discovering that perhaps I wasn't the kind of person they imagined their daughter should be with, for whatever reason. The school itself struggled a little bit, I think, to acclimatise itself to the idea that people from different backgrounds shouldn't be treated differently. Actually, what you're trying to do is identify the talent and nurture the talent within. Head teacher Peter Target one time took me to one side and said, "Now, I know you as this great sportsman and this great performer, and I don't understand where all this bad behaviour is coming from." So took me into his office, sat me down and said, I've got to stand by my teachers because they do a good job. But I want to stand by you because you've done a good job in raising the profile of the school for all your good things that you have done. And he set me a task of praising the 1974, this is appropriate actually, referendum document for the access to the European community. And he set me this task and I, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Went away, did it, and he gave me an A star and said, this is the kind of quality that I expect from you. Now, I didn't quite turn the corner academically at that point, didn't quite get my head stuck into academics, but it pulled me up and made me realise that actually you can do academic and all the other stuff side by side if you apply yourself. Unfortunately, I didn't apply myself immediately. I went in the school play, I got in the National Youth Theatre, continued on that track, if you like, of having fun, and just scraped through my A-levels at Southgate to get me to university, and that's when things changed dramatically. The last memory at Southgate School is becoming head boy. Andrew Blankfield, who was undoubtedly the brightest child in the year, who ended up going to Cambridge, stood against me. But it was the first time that the head boy and head girl had been elected by popular vote. In fact, we became known as the chairman of the upper school committee. And when the vote went to the rest of the school, I was elected. I don't think Andrew Blankfield has to this day forgiven me. But for me, it was a great experience of being head boy. It gave me a sense of responsibility. It didn't improve my academics much, but it did make me grow up and recognise that leadership was really important, that you couldn't just talk the talk, you had to walk the walk. And being head boy, I still quote it because it still impresses people. And that gave me a foundation, if you like, to move off into the world beyond Southgate School. And I first went to university in central London to do languages and politics. And I very quickly, within the first couple of weeks, spotted a young woman who, same age as me, same course as me. And I remember saying to Steve Silverton, who was a friend of mine back then, haven't seen him for about 40 years, but I said to him, that girl over there is really interesting. And he said, yeah, and you, London boy, have got no chance. Have you heard her accent? She went to private school. I said, well, we'll see about that, won't we? So in the next German lesson, I moved the books of somebody who was sitting next to her. I always remember he was a chap with a sports car. I didn't have a sports car. I had a beat-up old Renault 12. But he came into the class and said, why have you moved my books? I said, because that's my space next to that beautiful young woman. That young woman turned into my wife, and we're still very happily married, 37 years later. So it was a good move on my part. It was another good move for a good reason. Kim Barling now, has been a rock in my life, and she gave me courage and confidence. She had courage and confidence herself, having been to boarding school. She learned to be resilient, learned to be independent, and she translated a lot of that into my life. And I can always remember in the second term at university, Liz McNally, who became the Deputy Vice Chancellor, said to me, you're a very bright guy, how come you didn't do so well at secondary school? And I'm like, well, lots of other things going on, very busy. And she said, you could get a first. And I said, well, that's great, fantastic. Not having a clue what she was talking about. But I went back to Kim, who was very worldly wise, and said, Liz McNally said I could get a first. What does that mean? And she said, what do you mean, what does that mean? What sort of muppet are you? That means you could do the best you can do at university. And I remember thinking at that point, well, you know what? I haven't been trying that hard, and I'm getting all these great grades, so why don't I just try a bit harder and maybe get a first? And so that kind of set me on a new trajectory. In fact, I always became obsessive with making sure that I got A's in everything. And if I didn't get an A+ in everything, I was on the back of those lecturers saying, I should have an A+. Why am I? Tell me, where am I losing my marks? But it became absolutely, in fact, I used to terrorise them. But it was a good course. I did work hard. Kim and I went to Grenoble University in France as a year out because we were doing languages, which was another experience of the wider world beyond Palmer's Green and London. And we learned to speak French fluently. We learned to conduct ourselves in a foreign language, in a foreign country, in a foreign culture, which we then brought back with us to London. We both were very successful in undergraduate. I got a first-class degree, and that opened the door to scholarship funding, which ended up me getting a scholarship to London School of Economics to do a master's and PhD. And those were great times, made lots of great friends, still have great friends from those times. And it opened the world up to me in a way which only education can do. Much as Palmer's Green had become more diverse by the time I'd left Palmer's Green age 18, university education and the travelling abroad opened you up to all sorts of different currents.